The house hadn't changed, but the land had. I stood on the worn porch, my fingers ghosting over the splintered railing, staring out at the yard that had never felt like mine. The grass, which had grown far too tall, crept up the house like it was trying to pull it under, drown it, make it disappear. The woods beyond the back fence loomed, silent, still, and thicker than I remembered. The shadow from that forest stretched unnaturally across the ground toward the house despite the overcast sky. 10 years since I left this place without looking back, and with enough anger to stoke me into driving all the way back to California. The only place that had ever felt like home. The only place I had any memories of my mother. I never wanted to come back here. Ever. But then my father disappeared without a trace, and now I'm back to find out why. The cops had been over the property and in the house looking for clues as to my father's whereabouts, but they found nothing. The door was locked, but the key was under the heavy flower pot at the end of the porch where it had always been. Some things never changed, and my father's habits were some of the unchanging things in life. The door groaned as I pushed it open. The house exhaled dust and the smell of pipe tobacco. I inhaled and a flood of teenage memories rooted me to the spot. Every emotion one could feel passed through me. I shook it off after several seconds and stepped inside. Dust hung in the air, swirling through the dim light that filtered in from the small windows that still induced claustrophobia in me. After getting past the smell of stale tobacco, there were other scents lingering in the humid air. Age, wood, and of something else. Something wrong. Unable to place that odor that was somehow foul, dank, and distantly pleasant at the same time, I turned my focus back to finding clues about where Dad might have gone, where he might be, or what he might have gotten himself into. The last time I spoke with him was about 3 months prior, and he didn't seem well. He wasn't physically ill, but his mind didn't seem quite right, like he had become disorganized in his thought process or something. It wasn't bad enough to worry me at the time, but maybe I should have been worried. Dad's boots sat by the door untouched. His favorite chair by the fireplace stood empty, as if waiting for someone to sink back into it. And then there was the silence, the deep, deafening silence. See, that was the worst part. It seemed to be the kind of silence that listened, held secrets, and remembered. Did it remember me? Did it remember that I hated it? That I couldn't wait to get away? That I believed it would make me crazy? My laughter seemed far too loud as it echoed and bounced around the room. I shut up and headed to the next room, my father's little office that somehow felt even more claustrophobic than the living room with its small windows. The office had only one window set high in the wall so that barely any sunlight came into the room. And that's when I saw it. Dad's personal journal, laying closed on the desk. That custom-made leather-bound journal had been his prized possession, and he guarded it like a state secret when I was younger. He never let me near it. And yet there it was, within arm's reach, waiting to be opened. I couldn't resist the temptation. Had he just written about my mother and her death in that journal as I had suspected all those years ago, or were there deeper, darker thoughts scribbled onto the pages? Things that maybe I wouldn't want to learn, but might have suspected all along. I had often suspected that he resented Mom for dying and leaving him to raise me alone, and that he more than resented me. For a couple of years right before I left, I was sure he had grown to hate me. Not personally, but as a part of his life's path. I was sure he hated that he had fallen in love with a woman who would die horribly. Hated that he had an angsty teenage son to deal with all on his own. and I was sure he hated that Polly Sanders rejected him because he had me, the troubled teenage boy from California, who was rebelling in every way known to man. I took a step toward the journal, my hand outstretched. The floor creaked behind me, and my heart leaped into my throat. The sound was small, but in the heavy silence, it might as well have been a cannon shot. I spun so fast I almost lost my balance. But the house remained empty. There was no movement, no intruder, and yet something felt off. The shadows lurking in the corner seemed darker than they had reason to be. They looked like ink spilled across the walls and pooling in places where light should have reached. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. I turned to a window to look out. Beyond the fence, just at the edge of the woods, the shadows had shifted. They had moved into a position that just didn't make sense. I rubbed my eyes, shook my head, and silently cursed my father for disappearing and causing me to return. Nothing had ever seemed exactly normal about this place, and I'd always hated the stupid small town mentality, and even the niceness of the people there irritated me. It was like they're being too nice, smiling too much. It was a cover for something. I was sure of it. But one of the worst things about that place was the stories, the folklore that they never seemed to shut up about. Hearing that shit all the time would make any kid grow up terrified of their own yard, their own house, hell, even their own life. I thought since I was back, all that was just coming back to me and making me jumpy, so I turned from the window, forcing myself to think what to do next. The house pressed in on me, and the old sense of claustrophobia threatened. I shook my head again, pushing away memories that threatened to take hold. I'd come back to find out what happened to my father, not to drown in old resentments. It was proving to be a more difficult task than I had imagined when I left California. You know how you could stand still and silent in a house, and you could feel it? That's what I did. I stood there trying to pick up the vibe of the house. No matter what I did, no matter how I tried to change my thinking about the place, it just felt different. And I wondered, was it me, or was it the house? The shadows in the corners weren't just dark. They were strange, stretching, long, pooling too deep. The afternoon light outside had dimmed a little, but not enough to explain the suffocating gloom that was gathering inside. I was being stupid. Just like the hicks who lived around there. Paranoid, falling into their delusions. I mean, wasn't that why I had left in the first place? To keep from falling prey to everything there I considered stupid? I turned to the hallway that led to my father's bedroom, thinking it might be best if I did what I came to do and got the hell out of there as quickly as possible. My legs felt stiff and heavy under the weight of the silence, or the memories. I couldn't tell which. Maybe it was just jet lag, though. The door to his room was open, and I stepped inside. I scanned the familiar space, wondering how he could stay there all that time. The rooms were small and the decor was hokey, rural, and stereotypical for a small town in West Virginia mountains. How could he have been happy when there was such a lack of creature comforts? He'd been used to all that back before Mom died. What had he spent his money on? Because it certainly hadn't been spent upgrading the house or the property. The bed was neatly made and the nightstand still held all of his usual clutter, except there was an empty space that shouldn't have been empty. I walked over and traced the circle where the wood was darker. It was familiar. It came to me finally. My father had kept the lantern there for as long as I could remember. It was an old oil lantern he had bought from some guy in town not long after we moved. The town's electricity was unreliable, knocked out by high winds or bad storms, sometimes for days at a time. That lantern had been Dad's safety net. his way of pushing back the darkness when the power failed. But now, it was missing. Frowning, I scanned the room, suddenly aware of a sharp chill crawling up my arms. The air had shifted. It was thicker and heavier, as though something unseen had stirred. The light flickered. I turned sharply toward the window, my breath hitching. I wasn't prepared for the electricity to go out. I had no light except for my cell phone. Outside, the forest had grown darker, not because of the setting sun, but because the shadows near the tree line had changed again. They had shifted closer and were pressing against the fence like a tide rising toward shore. My pulse drummed faster. Had the shadows moved again, or had I imagined it? I watched. The darkness swelled and crept towards the house in slow, deliberate waves. Not a trick of the light, not my imagination. And something was moving in those shadows. I stared out the window, unmoving, my breath barely escaping past my lips. The trees stood still, their branches twisting in the ever-dimming light. But the shadows near the fence, they were shifting in ways that weren't natural. Again, I got the impression that they were pooling and running like spilled ink, only this time it was spilled onto uneven ground instead of straight, flat walls and floorboards. I tried to hammer down the paranoia rising in my chest. Maybe it was just the way the light was falling, just an illusion worsened by my exhaustion and memories I had no business digging into. But something gnawed at my mind. Something my father was always on about over the last year. Nearly every time we spoke, it was in the late evening for him, right around full dark. He had begun complaining about the shadows, late-night mutterings on the phone that never gave facts or any specifics, just that the shadows weren't right, that when the power flickered, he would see them move where they shouldn't be moving. He never once outright told me what was bothering him, only that the darkness and the shadows weren't right. I had dismissed it as loneliness, and maybe the very beginning stage of some old person's disease like dementia, but I thought it was only natural for him to rant like that as he grew older. He did live alone, and that would make something like that worse, right? But standing there, watching the way the dark seeped into the ground, into the air, it felt like something was watching back. The lights flickered again, longer this time, and the chill in the air deepened. A sharp sound broke the silence, wood creaking. My stomach dropped. It hadn't come from outside. It had come from inside the house. I turned toward the hallway, heart thundering in my ears. The living room lay untouched, the furniture frozen in the dim glow of fading daylight, but something in there had shifted. The shadows in the corners, the ones I'd noticed earlier, had spread. They weren't lurking anymore. They were stretching and reaching. The house had never felt welcoming. I'm pretty sure I've already made that clear, but now it just felt wrong. Like the walls were pressing in around me, like the air was waiting for its chance. But its chance for what? I didn't know. I only know that I had an impending sense of doom that wouldn't go away. I wanted to run out of the house and never look back, but what good would that do? That wouldn't find my father. That wouldn't answer any of my questions. Maybe the universe was pushing me to be like my father and run away from things I didn't know how to deal with. Things I didn't want to deal with. Things that scared me. Just like living without mom scared dad. Just like raising a teenage boy without the tenderness and understanding of his mother scared him. I listened but heard nothing. No wind, no birds, no hum of distant cars in town. Just a hollow ringing in my ears. I looked over the room again. The shadows in the corners still sat too thick, too long, and they stretched abnormally towards the floor where they looked deeper. And if I stared too long, I was afraid I might see something staring back. Another creak. Closer that time. I took an instinctive step back and my shoulder brushed the doorframe, my hands clenching involuntarily. Was someone there with me? Had someone else come looking for my father? Or perhaps it was a burglar. Someone there to loot the place. I eased back into the living room. The light through the windows had dimmed further, though the sun still hung low over the hills in the distance. Shouldn't it be brighter in the house still? I looked down and froze. The shadows had spread. They weren't just pulling against the baseboards anymore. They had stretched across the floor, and it seemed that deliberate strands of darkness were all heading in the same direction. Toward me. I took a step back. That couldn't be right. Shadows didn't move that way, and they sure as hell couldn't move consciously. I needed to get out. I stepped back once more and the electricity flickered again, but there was a longer pause before it came back on. And in that brief span of time, movement caught my attention outside the window. It wasn't the trees or the wind, it was something in the shadows. Then the lights were on again, and all I could see was my own ghostly reflection. But something was outside, watching, stalking. I was alone and without a weapon. Not a good feeling at all. The flickering overhead light hummed. It barely held against the creeping darkness. I turned toward the front door, and something shifted in the yard. The tall grass rippled like something had passed through it, something large and quiet. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to be invisible, trying to tamp down the panic. Town wasn't far, maybe 15 minutes down the winding 2-lane. My car was parked just outside. The logical part of my brain was begging me to leave, to get out of the house, and to forget about my father and his journal. I wanted to forget about whatever was happening in the woods and in the house with the shadows, but I couldn't. I knew I would live in regret for the rest of my life if I didn't at least grab that damn journal. It would drive me insane to never have at least the answers it could offer. As I walked towards Dad's office, I realized the shadows in the house were moving. Slow, deliberate movements that might have been dismissed if my senses weren't already on high alert. I crossed the threshold, picked up the journal, all the while holding my breath and expecting anything. The lights flicked off and stayed off. There was something in the shadows in front of the closet, tall, hollow, waiting and watching. The light came back on, and the shadow was gone. But I knew whatever had been outside, whatever had been in the woods, it had found its way into the house. I had to move. I had to get out. I gripped the journal tighter. I had to run for it. The lights went out, surrendering to the darkness completely. A whisper brushed by my right ear. I wasn't alone. I could see nothing. Everything had vanished into the void of absolute blackness. The only thing I knew for sure was that I wasn't alone in that darkness. Pulling air into my lungs, my eyes went wide against the dark and searching for any ambient light. I dug into my pocket for my phone. It was my only hope for light. But something shifted right beside me. Malevolence radiated from it. I was frozen from pure terror like I'd never felt before. If I reached out, I would touch something cold, ancient, and evil. The whisper came again, slightly louder than before, and there was a single word. Daniel. My fist tightened on my phone, and the screen came on. I was already moving, bolting toward the front door. I don't remember making the decision. My body simply reacted before my mind could keep up. I lunged for the door, yanking it open and nearly falling through the opening. Outside, the sky had darkened significantly, and the air was thick with moisture like a storm was brewing. I froze, but not because of the weather, not even because of the thing in the house behind me. It was the yard. The shadows had spread there too, not just under the trees, but across the grass, pulled against the fence and crawling towards the porch where I stood. It wasn't just darkness. Something was alive inside of it, and it wanted me to stay. With my heart coming out of my chest, fully seized by panic, the realization sank into my bones. The shadows weren't just gathering, they were reaching for me. I stepped toward the door, thinking I might go back inside to escape the horror outside, but the darkness within the house twitched, like a muscle, like instinct, like hunger. If I could cross the 30-foot gap between me and it, if I could get to my car before the shadows overtook the ground. The whisper came again. Daniel. It came from the darkness all around, from the trees, from the creeping black that billowed against my face. I ran. The moment my foot hit the dirt, the shadow lunged. They spilled forward, rushing across the ground like ink spilled in water, twisting into slow, curling waves. The black swallowed the gaps in the porch railing, in between the stepping stones, and the empty spaces between the leaves of the bushes by the steps. They stretched toward me with tendrils grasping at the air just behind my heels. The darkness bled across the driveway, coating the cracked pavement with liquid darkness. I stumbled once but didn't stop pushing forward. I shoved the journal under my arm and kept my grip on the phone. With the free hand, I snagged the car keys from my pocket. I fumbled with the keys and the fob. If I dropped them, I was done. Daniel. The whisper slid through the air to me. It felt like a silken caress on my ear, and I couldn't stop myself from spinning to look, expecting to see the thing from the house looming over my shoulder. Yet there was nothing. I risked a glance at the house. The front doors still stood open, gaping like a mouth waiting to be fed. The darkness inside was in constant motion, moving, writhing like a bundle of snakes. After what felt like 100 years of slow motion fumbling for my keys, I finally shoved my thumb down on the button, and the doors unlocked. Blessed light spilled from the car, washing over and chasing back the reaching shadows. The whispered scream of a million demons chased me into the car. I slammed the door and dumped the phone and journal onto the passenger seat. I jammed the key into the ignition and turned it on. The car roared to life, and it was the most gorgeous sound I've ever heard. It sounded like salvation. The headlights cut off, and then the bright beams cut through the dark, piercing it without mercy and chasing back those damnable shadows. All but one. It was trapped. It was a mass curling along the ground, stretching impossibly long beneath the beams, and heading back toward the fence in the woods beyond. I turned the car around and caught movement in the rear view. It was the mass. It was taking shape and heading back toward me. I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires screamed as the car lurched forward. The shadow moved faster, giving chase still, but I was already gone. The winding mountain road blurred past me. The headlights barely pierced the dark. My hands were clenched painfully tight around the steering wheel, my breath coming fast and shallow. The damn shadow had moved. It had chased me, not like an animal or a human. It had stretched, reached, pulling toward me, chasing in a way that defied everything I understood about the natural world. The edge of town finally flickered into view. Streetlights, scattering houses with warm, glowing lights in the windows, and then the gas station near the county line. People, civilization, and most importantly, light. I pulled in and parked, barely aware of killing the engine before I stumbled out onto the pavement under the fluorescent glow from the canopy over the pumps. The harsh light was surreal after the suffocating darkness I had just dealt with. I looked at the road and the trees of the mountain. They sat still in the distance, their shadows stretching across the road, pooling beneath street lamps. But nothing moved, nothing twitched. They stayed where they were supposed to. They acted as expected. I gripped the counter inside the station, my fingers aching from how tightly I had held the steering wheel. The cashier eyed me warily, half concerned, half annoyed, but didn't say anything. I couldn't speak right away. My mind wouldn't stop racing long enough for me to form a coherent sentence. The long fluorescence overhead buzzed softly, grounding me in something real, something normal. "You gonna buy us something, son?" the cashier asked. I shook my head and then nodded. "There's something out there in the shadows." She looked at me like I was a bug from one of Jupiter's moons. "Okay, well, you gonna buy us something? If you're not, y'all need to move along. Can't be hanging around here all—" "No," I yelled insistently. "You have to listen to me. It's in the shadows. It's alive. And I think it's hungry. You have to stay away from the shadows." The cashier nodded, a look of concern spreading over her face. She picked up the phone and dialed the number. "Could you call Sheriff Barker for me?" I asked frantically. "Call him. I'll talk to him and then I'll be out of your store. I won't bother you anymore." I knew she didn't believe me. Hell, I wouldn't have believed my story either. She clicked the phone off, eyed me, and dialed again. "Sheriff? Well, I got a young man out of towner here who wants to talk to you." No. He said over the phone it was fine. Drugs wouldn't surprise me. Maybe have them on their way. Thank you, Sheriff." She held the phone out to me, and I took it reluctantly. "Sheriff Barker? It's Daniel Waters. I need to talk to you about my father," I said. "Now, son, I told you we searched everywhere and everything. There ain't nothing." "I saw something. Back at the house, Sheriff. In the shadows." There was silence on the phone. I gripped the phone tighter, knowing I had to be careful what I said to him. I didn't want to end up in a West Virginia loony bin for the rest of my life. That would be too close to those shadows. Something about Barker's silence wasn't dismissive. It was more cautious, like maybe he knew exactly what I was talking about. "You saw something?" It wasn't a question. "Yes, Sheriff." "And where are you, son?" "I'm at the gas station on the county line." 15 minutes later, he pulled into the lot and got out of the cruiser. He lit a cigarette with a flick of his lighter. "So, you saw it?" I nodded. "Well, you're lucky. Most don't come back after seeing it." I wanted him to say more, needed him to, but he took his sweet time. Something in his expression led me to believe that whatever my father had been afraid of, whatever had likely taken him, Barker knew about it. "They always think it's just the woods, something natural," Barker said. "It's not natural, Sheriff," I said firmly. Barker exhaled a plume of swirling smoke. "Nah, kid, it ain't. Not in the least." "My father?" "Well, I tried to tell him to leave it be, but he wouldn't. He was trying to find a way to kill it. Things like that don't take kindly to that sort of thing. Well, your daddy wouldn't listen. He wouldn't leave." He flicked his cigarette into the dirt, watching as the ember disappeared into the darkness. "That shadow," he murmured, voice barely above a whisper. "It just don't take, son. It remembers. And it'd be wise to get your ass back to sunny California and forget about this business. That's my only advice for you, son. That thing is something old. It's been here longer than us. And once it knows you, well, it don't forget about you. Go home and do what humans are great at, forgetting this mess." He turned around and walked back to his cruiser, pausing just long enough to tip his hat before getting in. So the shadow hadn't just been watching me. It knew me. It had been waiting. I ran to his car and he rolled down the window. "Will it stay here and leave me alone?" He reached into his jacket pocket and tossed his lighter to me. "You ever see those shadows move again? You light a fire, you run, and you don't look back." "Well, how many people know about this?" He laughed dryly. "Huh, a lot more than would like to know about it." He leaned out of the window and lowered his voice. "It knows more people than you, me, or the whole town combined, son. It's working its way through them all. It gets us all in the end." He rolled up the window and started the cruiser. I watched the taillights fade into the distance. I filled my tank, bought the whole display of lighters, and all the matches on the shelf. The cashier asked if I was planning on camping or burning down the town when I told her to ring up 10 bundles of firewood. I loaded the car and drove. I drove until I had to stop, which was in Virginia. The sun was up. I stopped at the airport, bought a ticket, and flew back to California. I don't sleep at night, and my house is never truly dark. The hungry shadow knows almost everyone. That's what Barker said. There's a good chance it knows you already too. And if you're wise, you'll keep the lights on. Always.